Dinner that night was normal, but I wasn't. I couldn't stop watching his every move, the way he cut his steak, how his lips turned up just a bit at the corner before he took a bite. He had this whole secret language I'd never learned. Like, was he really this clueless? Or was there something I was totally missing? Maybe he'd noticed how I was acting, and that made me even more jittery. My phone buzzed, and it was my brother. Another dumb meme. I couldn't help but snort, and my husband looked up, startled. I shoved my phone under the table, guilt twisting in my gut. This stupid secrecy was getting to me, making me feel like I was living a double life. Next day, there he was. Coffee shop guy. Our eyes locked as I ordered, and seriously, it was like a jolt went through me. A good jolt or a run screaming jolt? I honestly couldn't tell. My heart started hammering in my chest, and I think he noticed, because his eyes lingered on mine too long. Did he know? Could he feel this weird thing between us? Later on, in the bathroom, I did it. Slipped my wedding ring off, laid it against the cold tile. The flesh hit my cheeks, so hot it almost hurt. I stared at the ring, this little gold circle that suddenly felt like some kind of shackle. This wasn't just some crush. This was something big twisting itself inside of me. Something that scared the hell out of me, but it felt thrilling too. The ring felt so foreign on my finger again. Like I was putting on a costume, pretending to be someone I wasn't anymore. The whole house, my whole life, had this stifling feeling to it. But then, the feeling of his hands on me the night before was still buzzing under my skin. Not the safe, soft touches of my husband, but hot, urgent, like fire, dangerous, but a fire I couldn't stop myself from reaching for. I got a text. Work trip. I lied to my husband. My fingers flew over the keys, and every line made me bolder. I started packing, and for once, it wasn't stuff he'd seen a million times. It was the red dress I'd bought, and never had the guts to wear. The bag felt heavier than heavier because of the lies and the excitement, or maybe even the shame. It was a jumbled mess, matching the tangled up emotions inside of me. I'm waiting. His text was short, simple, yet that's all it took. One stupid text and everything, all my resolve, just crumbled. It was a mix of fear and something else. Like the feeling you get right before jumping off a high dive. You're gonna scream, you know you are, but you're gonna jump anyway. A part of me wanted to scream and run, but another part of me was already running, right towards him. Jenny, my best friend since forever, dropped me off at the train station. She just gave me one of those looks, you know, eyebrow raised, a little pity in her eyes. She didn't say anything, but she didn't need to. That silence hung between us, as heavy as the bag in my hand. It was a judgment without words, but maybe even a lifeline, if I wanted to reach back for it. His apartment. Oh, his apartment was different from anything I'd known. The artwork, strange and swirling. The spice rack filled with jars labeled in languages I couldn't read. It was a whole new world. Exciting and kinda terrifying all at once. His records weren't stuff you hear on the radio. His books had weird titles and worn covers, like he'd actually read them more than once. Every single thing screamed. Different, complicated, like him. I think that's when it hit me. This wasn't just some dumb fling. This guy, he wasn't like my husband. He was more unpredictable, a bit unhinged maybe, but in a way that sparked something wild inside of me. And the scariest part was, I wanted more too. I wanted to explore all those strange corners I'd never even seen in myself. The morning came way too fast. The light was different through his blinds, harsh and unforgiving, like a spotlight on my sins. Panic started to bubble up inside of me. I should have been gone hours ago, back on the train to my old life. Instead, I just lay there, paralyzed, next to a man who was a stranger with very familiar lips. The walk home was hell. Every person on the street, their eyes were on me. I could feel it. Judging me, whispering. I kept my head down, imagining headlines screaming from newsstands. Cheating wife exposed. It was all just nerves, probably, but the feeling was so real. I could barely breathe. Back home, putting on my ring felt like the biggest lie ever. It wasn't just jewelry anymore. It was this whole disguise. Making my husband's favorite dinner, the motions felt automatic. Like I was just some robot, playing out a life that wasn't really mine. How many times had I done this same meal? Smiled at him across the table while my mind was a million miles away? My phone buzzed, and it was him, of course. My heart hammered against my ribs, and I almost dropped it. Every time his name flashed on the screen, it was like holding a live wire. Terrifying but electric too. The guilt would hit me later. For now, the adrenaline rush was all that mattered. "Can't stop thinking about you," he texted. A simple sentence, but it was enough to turn me inside out. My hands shook as I typed back, the lie slipping easily from my fingers. "Me too." I stared at that little white lie on the screen. It looked so harmless, but it felt like a bomb waiting to go off. My whole life, every good thing I thought I had. It was all balanced on this stupid back and forth. Each text felt like another brick pulled from the tower, and I just knew, the whole thing was going to come crashing down. Dreams were no escape anymore. My husband's face would melt and shift, morphing into his face. The sharp angles, that sly smile haunting me even in sleep. I'd wake up with a gasp, tangled in the sheets, guilt clinging to me like sweat. The thrill of the affair had curdled into a dread I carried everywhere, a weight crushing me down. My phone buzzed, and I almost threw it across the room. It was my brother. 3 words stared back at me. "I saw you." My blood ran cold. What did he see? Did he see us together? My hand brushing his arm? Did he see me sneaking out at night? I didn't even dare ask, the unspoken question hanging between us like a death sentence. Work was a whole new level of hell. Emails blurred on the screen. My boss's voice just a meaningless drone. Every stupid spreadsheet, every conference call, was torture. My mind wouldn't focus, fixating instead on my brother's text. "I saw you. I saw you. I saw you," echoed in my skull like a drumbeat. The shame made me physically sick, the fear even worse. My husband, God, his kindness just made it all worse. His "are you okay?" cut into me with surgical precision. His worried brow, the genuine affection in his voice, it all made me want to scream. He didn't deserve this act one was putting on. He deserved honesty, a wife who could meet his gaze without flinching. That night, he touched my face. Just a soft brush of his fingers, a gesture that used to be as comforting as a warm blanket. But now, his touch burned. He looked at me with that same care in his eyes, and I swear, I almost broke down and confessed everything right then and there. But the words wouldn't come. Cowardice choked me, keeping the truth locked inside. I turned away, hating myself more with each passing second. The lies were building up, piling higher and higher until they threatened to smother me. My brother knew, maybe others did too. My husband's concern was morphing into suspicion, a spotlight shining directly on me. The walls were closing in. And me? I was the rat caught in the trap of my own making, desperately chewing at the bars but knowing escape was impossible. This wasn't a messy crush anymore. This was my whole life imploding, and all I could do was watch the inevitable explosion. The house suddenly felt cramped, suffocating. My parents in town, their familiar chatter, their questions about my work, my friends, background noise compared to the storm in my head. I went through the motions. Dinners, polite smiles, all the while feeling like I was on stage, the spotlight getting hotter by the minute. "Something's off with her," I heard Dad whisper to Mom in the hallway. My ears perked up against my will. "She seems distant. Trouble in paradise?" His voice was low, but my paranoia amplified it. Had I slipped up, said something I shouldn't have? Their eyes would flicker my way, and I'd swear I could see the suspicion growing behind their smiles. I needed escape, so I took a walk in my old neighborhood park. Used to be my happy place, but now every tree, every bench, was just a reminder of the carefree girl I wasn't anymore. And then I saw her, Mrs. Peterson, my middle school teacher, the one with the kind eyes who always saw through my excuses. She caught my eye, a knowing look on her face. No judgment, just a question, an understanding. I looked away, unable to meet her eyes, and hurried on. That night, everything exploded. My husband cleaning out his drawer, my travel bag shoved in the back. I tried to play it cool, but when he pulled out that stupid little hotel-sized shampoo bottle, it was over. His face, his whole body, went rigid. The questioning look, the hurt confusion, It was unbearable. He didn't have to ask. I couldn't look him in the eye. My silence was the final confession. Jenny offered her sofa. It felt more like jail than a sanctuary. Her pitying looks were another form of judgment. The quiet a different kind of noise than my parents', but equally suffocating. Her apartment, with its two clean surfaces and its carefully arranged bowls of potpourri. It was a stage set for a person I no longer was. My life was a crumbling house of cards, and I was trapped in the rubble. I needed to get out, get away from everything and everyone. But where could I go? Every corner of this town held too many memories, too much of myself. The girl in the wedding photos, the girl in the park. The shattered pieces seemed impossible to escape. I was drowning, and everyone knew but me how to pull myself out of the wreckage. The envelope was heavy in my hands. Divorce papers. Even the words tasted like acid on my tongue. Each page was a death sentence for the life I thought I wanted. A twisted reminder of everything I'd broken. But strangely enough, there was a flicker of something else. Not relief, but an exhale I hadn't realized I was holding in. I needed to drown out the words on those pages, the whispers of my parents, the disappointment in my brother's eyes. So, I wore that dress, the red one I'd never had the nerve for, and I went dancing. The club was a blur of lights and sweat. I pushed my body to limits, the rhythm a desperate attempt to match the chaos in my head. My hips swayed to a beat I couldn't hear over the blood pounding in my ears. It was reckless, self-destructive, and maybe for a few hours, I didn't feel completely dead inside. My phone buzzed. It was him, of course. "I miss you." For stupid words, yet they held me hostage. I deleted the text with trembling fingers, but the feeling lingered. It was poison and honey all mixed together. A twisted sort of ache I craved even though I knew it would kill me. I hated myself for how his memory held me in its grip, even as the world came crashing down. My brother. I couldn't face him yet. Not his look of disgust, the way he'd spit out the word, cheater, like it was venom in his mouth. I knew he was right, of course. I knew he worried too, but the shame burned hotter than the guilt. Better to stay away until the rawness eased. Then, there he was. My husband. On the doorstep, looking. Broken. Not angry, not accusatory. Just broken. The fight had left him, replaced by a hollow echo of the man I'd sworn my life to. His eyes held a sorrow I knew too well, my reflection staring back at me. We didn't say much, couldn't really. There were no words left that wouldn't cause more damage. But in that empty space between us, there was a shift. This wasn't about a battle anymore. It was about the aftermath, the wreckage we'd both created. That night, I didn't put on my wedding ring. Instead, I stared at the empty space on my finger, and it felt less like a prison sentence and more like a scar, something to remember the wound. Maybe even the way I'd started to heal. Days turned into weeks, each one a blur of insomnia and forced bites of food that tasted like ash. My apartment was a tomb, my bed a battlefield where my mind waged endless war against itself. The world outside had turned into a silent movie, everyone going about their lives like they weren't walking on eggshells. I was the broken record, the stuck track no amount of fast-forwarding could fix. The lawyer's office was sterile, paperwork with words so final they squeezed the breath from my lungs. Assets, custody. There was no custody battle, thankfully, as we didn't have kids, dissolution of marriage. It was all just legalese for heartbreak. He signed, I signed, and that was it. My whole life, reduced to a few scribbled signatures and a stamp. I stumbled out of there, shell-shocked. Did that seriously just happen? My feet led me to a generic coffee shop. The smells, the buzz of people, all of it a jarring backdrop to the silent scream inside of me. I just sat, staring, hands wrapped around a mug I had no intention of drinking from. Life had a cruel sense of humor, that was for sure. Then, I saw him on the street. Not him, not really. Just a stranger with the same broad shoulders, that same way of tilting his head when he laughed. My heart did a flip, stupid heart, doing gymnastics for a ghost. Then the guy turned, and it wasn't him at all, just another face in the crowd. I collapsed back in my chair, equal parts relieved and devastated all at once. My parents swooped in like they could heal this with hugs and homemade lasagna. Their worried faces, the constant stream of, "How are you doing, dear?" It was suffocating. I knew they meant well, but their presence just felt like a constant reminder of the good, normal girl they raised, the daughter who was no more. Their clueless sympathy just made me want to scream. It was like I was living in two different worlds. The one where smiles were required and, "I'm fine," was the only acceptable answer, and the other one, the dark, lonely place where I was unraveling entirely, thread by thread. Holding those two worlds together was exhausting. It felt like I was about to snap. The package on my doorstep was unexpected. My name, his scrawling handwriting. It felt dangerous, like holding a live wire. Inside wasn't jewelry or flowers, but a book. Poetry, poems he'd loved enough to remember. Lines underlined in his messy writing. They whispered the promises I'd clung to, the beautiful lies that had ensnared me. My fingers traced the words, and that old, dangerous thrill flickered to life again. Shame washed over me, then anger. It was a cruel move, proof that this wasn't over, not for him. Dreams turned into nightmares again. My husband, packing his bags methodically. The slam of his dresser drawer echoed through the empty house and into my sleep. I'd always jolt awake right before the finality of him walking out. My scream trapped silently in my throat. Waking up alone, the sheets twisted around me, was almost worse than the dream itself. My brother came by. This time, the word, affair, hung unspoken, a ghost between us. But instead, he cracked a stupid joke, told stories from when we were kids, when the world seemed simpler. We talked late, not fixing the mess, but for a little while, it didn't feel so heavy. The connection, the normalcy, it was grounding. Maybe not healing, but a lifeline. I went back to the park, that old place of escape now tainted by guilt. And there she was, Mrs. Peterson. She gave me a gentle smile and sat beside me on the bench. I didn't bolt this time. Her questions weren't accusatory, but filled with a deep kindness. Questions that forced me to look at the ugly parts I'd been desperately avoiding. I didn't have answers, but maybe that was the point. My phone buzzed. "Can we talk?" 5 words from my husband, and my heart hammered in my chest. This was it, the real confrontation, the final battle maybe. It felt like an unexploded bomb, sitting there on the screen, and I was frozen, too terrified to disarm it, too scared of what would happen if I just let it explode. It was decision time, sink or swim time, and honestly, I had no idea if I could even tread water much longer. Night was hell. I'd lie in bed, eyes wide in the dark, a sick horror movie playing in my head. My husband's voice, twisted with pain, battling with his whispered sweet nothings. The echo of both their words hammered away at my sanity. My own treachery, my own weakness, played on endless repeat, and I had no way to shut it off. Then I saw him again, my husband, not alone, but with another woman. She was normal looking, nice. There they were, laughing at some dumb joke, hands never quite touching, but it hit me harder than any fling ever could. This was real life. This was what could easily replace our shattered marriage. The wound it left went deeper, the pain more bone-chilling than anything that had come before. The meeting finally happened. Awkward doesn't even begin to cover it. Lukewarm coffee we didn't sip, a tense silence filling the air thicker than any fog. His eyes, those eyes I used to know so well, searched mine. There was pain there, but also a flicker of something else. Desperate hope? Maybe? It sliced right through me. "Let's try making this work," he said. And part of me, a buried, scared part, wanted to believe the words, to cling to them like a lifesaver. The hope in his voice, it was a knife in my gut. But another part of me, a cynical, broken part, knew it was a fairy tale. The words had no magic left. Jenny saw it before I did. She's always been sharper than me, cut through my own crap long before I even saw it. "You haven't made a choice yet, have you?" Her simple question was an arrow to the heart. She was right. I was frozen, playing both sides, running from the truth. This wasn't about either man anymore. This battle was me against myself, and I was losing, badly. The weight of this mess, the decisions I'd put off in some cowardly bid to escape the pain, it was crushing me. The ground was crumbling beneath me, and I was just staring down at my feet, unable to climb out of this pit I dug for myself. Rain hammered down, the kind that mirrors the chaos in your head. I walked, legs on autopilot, and ended up on his street. Staring up at his window felt pathetic, desperate. And exactly what I did. It was a self-inflicted horror show. His light went out, just as I knew it would. And then, another shadow at the window. My breath hitched. It was a woman's silhouette. That's when it hit me. He wasn't waiting for me. Our affair was one option among many. The realization wasn't dramatic. It was a dull ache. The last shreds of my delusion ripped away. I went home, soaked to the bone. Packed a single bag. Not some grand escape, but a desperate retreat. My brother showed up, thankfully saving me from explanations. He just nodded, grabbed my bag, and we left. The drive was a blur of rain and tears. My reflection in the window was a stranger, blurred and broken. The world outside wicked by, but I was frozen. Our destination was the beach house, where we'd spent carefree summers. Now, the endless sand felt more like a battlefield. But the sea, the salt air, it held a strange kind of promise. Not a promise of answers, but maybe the chance to face my mess, head on, without the distractions of everyday life. It was caught in a compromising photo that threatens to unravel everything. Jenna faces a heart-wrenching decision. Cling to the comfort of her past or dive into the unknown with the man who makes her feel alive again. Will she embrace the chaos and start anew? Or will the secrets she's keeping destroy more than just her wedding plans? Jenna sat on the edge of her bed, staring blankly at the row of boxes lined against her bedroom wall. Each box was neatly labeled in her own tidy handwriting: wedding decor, guest favors, planner, docs. The sight should have filled her with a bubbly, pre-wedding excitement. Instead, it felt like a row of judges, each box a silent testament to the choices she'd made and was about to make. She picked up her phone, swiping through the group chat where her friends were enthusiastically planning the bachelorette party. The screen was a blur of exclamation points and emojis, messages zooming in about the latest bar crawl route and the mandatory high-heeled escapade through the city's poshest clubs. It's going to be a blast, her maid of honor had texted. Jenna couldn't muster a smile. If only they knew, she murmured, her voice barely a whisper against the hum of the air conditioner. The truth was, Jenna had never enjoyed the wild nights out that her friends reveled in. She preferred quiet evenings at home or intimate gatherings with close friends where the music didn't drown out the conversations. She typed a response, a simple thumbs-up emoji, then tossed the phone beside her. It landed with a soft thud against the comforter, the screen darkening as if it too had given up on convincing her to feel the excitement. Rising from the bed, Jenna walked over to the window, her reflection faint in the dusky glass. The setting sun painted the sky in strokes of orange and purple, a beautiful end to an otherwise mundane day. As she turned from the window, her gaze fell on the invitation for the bachelorette party. It lay on her dresser, bold and mocking under the weight of a silver paperweight. Next to it was a picture of her and Mark, taken during a hike last fall. They were both smiling, the kind of genuine smiles that come from shared joy and love. The contrast between her current dread and that moment of happiness was stark. Maybe I'm just overthinking it, Jenna said to herself, trying to shake off the gloom. She walked back to her phone and picked it up, deciding she might as well get ready for the evening. As she browsed through her wardrobe for something suitable, her thoughts drifted to Mark. He had been supportive, kind, the sort of partner everyone hoped for. Yet as the wedding approached, Jenna felt more like she was tiptoeing around a stranger than leaning on her future husband. Their conversations had grown perfunctory, filled with the logistics of wedding plans, rather than the laughter and light-hearted debates that used to define them. She chose a black dress, simple yet elegant, with a pair of matching heels, ridiculously high and just as uncomfortable as she feared. Perfect for a night of regrets, she joked dryly to her reflection as she dressed. Her phone buzzed again, a message from Kyle popping up on the screen. Hey, are we still on for tomorrow's meeting? Need to finalize those budget amendments. Kyle, just seeing his name brought a flutter of something forbidden to her stomach. He was everything Mark wasn't. Exciting, unpredictable, a little dangerous. and that danger felt thrilling. Jenna quickly typed a reply, affirming their meeting, her fingers lingering a moment longer than necessary on the send button. As she added the finishing touches to her makeup, her mind replayed the last time she and Kyle were alone together. The memory was vivid, intoxicating. It was a stark contrast to the reflection that stared back at her now, a woman about to celebrate her last days of singlehood, feeling less like a bride-to-be and more like a prisoner marking off the days. With a final glance at her phone, Jenna grabbed her clutch and headed out, the invitation glinting under the room's soft lighting, a silent sentinel to the night ahead. As the door closed behind her, the quiet click echoed a bit too loudly, like the final tick of a countdown she wasn't sure she wanted to end. The bar was pulsating with the beat of electronic music, its bass deep enough to vibrate through Jenna's high heels and up her spine. Around her, the club was awash in strobe lights and laughter, a sea of bodies moving in sync with the rhythm. Her friends, a vibrant cluster of excitement, led the charge, each one adorned in outfits as glittering and elaborate as their personalities. Jenna followed behind, her smile plastered on as she sipped the cocktail that was more sugar than alcohol. Every now and then, a loud cheer would erupt from her group, pulling her back from the edge of her isolated thoughts. She watched as they danced, their movements free and uninhibited, a stark contrast to the stiffness in her own limbs. "Come on, Jenna, live a little," shouted her best friend, Kara, over the music. She grabbed Jenna's hand, pulling her toward the dance floor. Reluctantly, Jenna let herself be dragged into the center of the whirlwind, her body awkwardly trying to match the rhythm. As the night wore on, Jenna's thoughts began to drift away from the thumping chaos around her. She thought of Kyle, his easy smile, and how effortlessly he seemed to pull her into a world filled with exciting possibilities. She remembered the way his hand had accidentally brushed hers during their last meeting, sending a shock of electricity through her veins. The memory was a contrast to the numbing interaction she now endured in the loud, crowded bar. Needing a breath of fresh air, Jenna excused herself from the group and made her way to the quieter patio area of the club. The cool night air was a relief after the stifling atmosphere inside. She leaned against the railing, taking in deep breaths, trying to calm the storm inside her. Just as she started to feel a bit of peace, her phone vibrated in her clutch. It was a text from Mark. "Hope you're having fun tonight. Love you." The message should have warmed her, but instead, it felt like a reminder of the growing chasm between them. Jenna typed back a quick, "Love you too," her fingers hesitating as she added a smiling emoji. Lost in her thoughts, she didn't notice the figure approaching until he was standing beside her. "Quite the party, huh?" Kyle's voice was soft, yet it cut through the night air with clarity. Jenna jumped slightly, surprised to find him there, in a place she hadn't expected him to be. "Kyle, what? What are you doing here?" she stammered, her pulse quickening. "Just had some friends meeting up here. Saw your group come in. You seem like you could use some company out here," he replied, his eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that made her heart race. They talked for a while, the conversation flowing easily, naturally. Jenna found herself laughing genuinely for the first time that evening, her earlier reservations melting away in Kyle's presence. But as the minutes ticked by, the reality of their situation crept back into her mind. We shouldn't be doing this," Jenna finally said, pulling back slightly. "It's not fair to Mark." Kyle's expression hardened for a moment before softening. "I know," he admitted, "but sometimes it's hard to deny what you feel, isn't it?" Jenna looked away, the city lights blurring as her eyes filled with unshed tears. "I should go back inside," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. Kyle reached out, gently touching her arm. "Whatever you decide. I'm here," he said softly. Jenna nodded, pulling her arm away and walking back into the club without looking back. The rest of the night passed in a blur. Jenna went through the motions, dancing and smiling when expected, but her thoughts were elsewhere. As the party wound down, she felt a deep exhaustion, not from the night's activities, but from the weight of the decisions looming over her. Back at her apartment, as she kicked off her heels and sank onto her bed, Jenna knew she couldn't keep going like this. Something had to change. But as sleep finally claimed her, she was no closer to knowing which path to take. The morning light crept in hesitantly through the curtains, painting soft stripes across her face. She awoke with a start, the remnants of the previous night's music still ringing faintly in her ears. Her head throbbed slightly, a gentle reminder of the overindulgence in both alcohol and emotions. Jenna lay in bed for a few moments, gathering her thoughts. Her memories of the night were fragmented, colored by the vibrant lights of the club and the quieter, more intense moments with Kyle on the patio. The realization of her conversation with him made her stomach churn with anxiety. The feelings she harbored couldn't be brushed under the rug any longer. With a heavy sigh, Jenna pulled herself out of bed. As she made her way to the kitchen for a much-needed cup of coffee, her phone pinged with a new message. Expecting it to be one of her friends checking in after the party, she was surprised to find a text from Mark. "Good morning. Beautiful. How did the party go? We need to talk when you have a moment." The last part caught her off guard. We need to talk. Nothing good ever came from those words. Her mind raced with possibilities. Did he know about her and Kyle? Was it something else entirely? Anxiety tightened its grip around her heart as she typed a quick response. "Morning. Last night was fun. I'm a bit tired but good. We can talk anytime. Is everything okay?" She set the phone down, her appetite for coffee forgotten. As she paced the living room, Jenna tried to piece together how she would handle the conversation. Her relationship with Mark had always been based on mutual trust and openness. Yet here she was, tangled up in emotions for another man. Guilt gnawed at her as she thought about the hurt that would flash across Mark's face if he ever found out. The phone vibrated again. Mark's reply was quick. "Can we meet for lunch? There's something important I need to discuss." "Of course," Jenna replied, her mind spiraling as she imagined what awaited her. The wait until lunch felt unbearable, each minute dripping by like molasses. She showered and dressed mechanically, her thoughts elsewhere. At the restaurant, Jenna spotted Mark waiting at a table by the window. He stood up when he saw her, his smile warm but tinged with a seriousness that confirmed her fears. Something was definitely off. As she approached, Mark pulled her into a brief, tight hug, which Jenna returned, trying to read any signs of anger or disappointment in his expression. They sat down, and after ordering drinks, a heavy silence settled between them. "So, what's on your mind?" Jenna broke the silence, her voice steadier than she felt. Mark took a deep breath, his fingers drumming on the table. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," he began, his eyes not meeting hers. "About us, about the wedding, everything." Jenna felt her heart skip a beat. And I feel like we're rushing into this. We've been so caught up in the wedding planning. I'm not sure if we're really ready." His words were careful, measured. Jenna's mind raced. This wasn't the conversation she had expected. Was he having doubts about them? Or was this about something else? "I love you, Jenna. I really do. But I think we might be ignoring some bigger issues between us. Maybe we need to slow things down. Reassess what we both want." The relief that it wasn't about Kyle was overshadowed by the shock of Mark's words. Slow things down? Reassess? The words echoed ominously. Jenna realized that while she had been grappling with her feelings for Kyle, Mark had been battling his own doubts. "Are you saying you want to postpone the wedding?" she asked, her voice a whisper. Mark nodded slowly. "Maybe it's for the best. I don't want to marry you with doubts in my mind, and I'm sure you wouldn't want that either." Jenna sat back, her mind a whirl of emotions. Part of her felt a guilty relief, but another part was devastated. The future she had envisioned seemed to crumble before her eyes, yet the space it left was filled with uncertain possibilities. As they continued to talk, laying their concerns bare, Jenna realized this was a pivotal moment. Whatever decision they made now would change the course of their lives forever. And somewhere in the depths of her heart, she knew she needed this space just as much as Mark did, perhaps even more. The lunch with Mark had stretched into the early afternoon, a long session of difficult but honest conversation that left Jenna feeling emotionally drained but oddly liberated. They had agreed to take a break, to give each other some space to think about what they truly wanted from their lives and from each other. As Jenna left the restaurant, the reality of what this break could mean began to sink in. It could be the beginning of the end of her relationship with Mark, or it might just be the necessary pause they needed to realign their futures. As she walked through the bustling city streets, Jenna felt the weight of their decision pressing on her. The familiar sights and sounds of the city that usually brought her comfort now seemed distant and muffled, as if she was observing the world from behind a glass wall. She knew she needed to clear her head and sort through her tangled emotions. Deciding a change of scenery might help, Jenna drove to the nearby park, a place filled with greenery and paths that meandered alongside a gentle river. The park was a stark contrast to the urban chaos of the city, and as she walked under the canopy of trees, Jenna felt a slight ease in the tension that had built up inside her. She found a secluded bench by the water and sat down, watching the gentle flow of the river. Her mind replayed the lunch conversation over and over. Mark's words, "I don't want to marry you," with doubts in my mind, echoed, mingling with her own doubts about her feelings for Kyle. The complexity of her emotions made her head spin. She loved Mark, she was sure of that. But was it the comfortable and secure love that she wanted for the rest of her life? Or was there something more she was yearning for? And where did Kyle fit into all of this? Lost in thought, Jenna didn't notice the approaching footsteps until a familiar voice brought her out of her reverie. "Mind if I join you?" It was Kyle, his hands in his pockets, a cautious smile on his face. Jenna was taken aback by his sudden appearance. "Kyle, what are you doing here?" "I was in the area," Kyle said, though Jenna suspected he might have followed her from the restaurant. He sat down next to her, maintaining a respectful distance. "You look like you could use some company," Jenna sighed, a part of her relieved to not be alone with her thoughts anymore. "It's been a day," she admitted. "Mark and I are taking a break." Kyle's expression changed slightly, a mix of concern and something else. Was it hope? "I'm sorry, Jenna, that sounds tough, but maybe it's a good thing? Gives you space to think?" "Yeah, space to think," Jenna echoed, her voice tinged with irony. They sat in silence for a moment, watching a pair of ducks glide across the river. The tranquility of the park was a soothing balm, but it couldn't quite numb the turmoil inside her. Kyle spoke again, breaking the silence. "You know, whatever happens, I'm here for you. I care about you, Jenna. A lot." Jenna turned to look at him, his earnest expression meeting her gaze. The connection between them was undeniable, a current as real and powerful as the river before them. But was it enough to build a future on? "Kyle, Jenna paused, unsure of what to say. Her heart was a tangled mess of emotions, guilt, desire, confusion. Before she could formulate her thoughts, Kyle reached out and took her hand. "You don't have to decide anything now, Jenna. Just know that whatever you decide, I'll support you." Jenna squeezed his hand, grateful for his understanding. But as comforting as his words were, they also added another layer of complexity to her situation. She was at a crossroads, with each path leading to unknown destinations. Could she risk everything for a new love? Or was the history and comfort with Mark worth fighting for? As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the park, Jenna knew the coming days would require deep reflection. She needed to explore the depths of her own heart and decide which path to follow. The decision wouldn't be easy, but it was necessary. For now, she would take things one step at a time. Jenna spent the following days in a state of introspection, her mind endlessly cycling through the possible futures laid out before her. She tried to envision her life with Mark, the stability and companionship they had built together over the years. They shared a comfortable home, mutual friends, and family ties that were deeply interwoven. Yet, that image was clouded by a sense of routine and predictability that had slowly begun to feel suffocating. On the other hand, her thoughts about Kyle brought a rush of excitement and a sense of adventure that she hadn't felt in years. He challenged her, sparked her curiosity, and most importantly, he seemed to understand her in ways that Mark no longer did. However, Jenna couldn't shake off the guilt that came with her attraction to Kyle. Was it fair to pursue this new connection at the cost of her long-term relationship with Mark? Needing a distraction, Jenna decided to meet up with her close friend, Leah, who was always good at providing perspective. They met at a quaint cafe downtown, a neutral space far from the trails of the park and the echoes of her recent life-changing discussions. As they sat down with their coffee, Leah could sense Jenna's unease. "You look like you're carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders," Leah remarked, her eyes full of concern. Jenna managed a weak smile. Feels like it, she confessed. She then poured out everything. The troubles with Mark, her feelings for Kyle, and the overwhelming uncertainty about what she should do next. Leah listened intently, nodding occasionally, her expression thoughtful. When Jenna finished, Leah took a moment before responding. It sounds like you're at a real turning point, she said gently. But maybe that's not a bad thing. Sometimes, we need these moments to really think about what we want from life. But what if I make the wrong choice? Jenna asked, her voice tinged with fear. Leah reached across the table, her hand covering Jenna's. There isn't a right or wrong choice here, only what's right for you. And whatever you decide, it doesn't have to be forever. People change, situations change. The most important thing is to choose what feels right for you right now. Her friend's words were a comfort, but they also carried a weight of responsibility. Jenna realized that she couldn't make her decision based on fear. Fear of hurting Mark, fear of the unknown with Kyle, or fear of judgment from others. As they parted ways, Leah's parting words stayed with Jenna. Trust yourself, Jenna. You know more than you think you do. Over the next few days, Jenna took Leah's advice to heart. She spent long hours alone, walking, writing in her journal, and reflecting. Slowly, she started to understand that her relationship with Mark had been comfortable, but no longer brought her the joy it once did. She was holding on to it out of familiarity and a fear of the upheaval that change would bring. With Kyle, she felt alive and seen. Yet, she questioned if this was enough to build a lasting relationship on. Was it merely the excitement of something new? Or was it something deeper? Something that could sustain them through the inevitable challenges of life? Finally, after much soul-searching, Jenna knew what she needed to do. She arranged to meet Mark at the same restaurant where they had discussed taking a break. As she waited for him to arrive, Jenna felt a nervous energy coursing through her. She was about to step into a new chapter of her life, one that was uncertain and fraught with challenges, but also filled with potential. When Mark arrived, he looked